Joining us now to discuss the growing relationship between Central and Eastern Europe and China, Grzegorz Kolodko is a former Polish Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance. He joins us from Warsaw. From Budapest, Tamas Matura is the founder of the Central and Eastern Europe Center for Asian Studies. Here on set, Anton Fedyashin is a professor of history at American University. And from Beijing, Victor Gao is an international relations expert. Welcome to all of you. Grzegorz Kolodko, let me start with you. When we look at this grouping called the 16+1, we have 11 East European states, 5 Balkan states, and of course China. It's an important regional diplomatic and economic initiative for China, formed 5 years ago. And if we look at the last 5 years, what are the benefits that have come to these member states?
Out of these 16 countries, 11 are already the members of the European Union. The remaining 5 of the Balkan region, former Yugoslavia's republic, and Albania are looking to join the European Union, but everybody and each of us is looking for best possible relations from the countries outside of the European Union, because we see globalization as an irreversible process, and we would like to take advantage of trading, using capital, savings, investment, transfer of technology with some other countries. And China, of course, being such a huge market with such important financial surprises, is an attractive partner for us. So aside of ongoing deepening and enlargement of the European integration, there is a great deal of concern to have as much active economic, including investment, trade, capital transfer, exchange of technologies, cooperation with China. But from China's perspective, we are small countries. Even my country, my great country of Poland, which is almost 40 million people, growing almost 5% this year in terms of GDP, from China's perspective, is a small emancipating market, emerging economy. So for that reason, China put us to one basket, calling 16 East Central European countries, all the way from northeast Estonia down to South Albania, where Poland is the central one on the new Silk Road. And for us, good relations with China bilaterally and in the broader context of East Central European region is of utmost importance.
Tomasz, the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang was recently in the region. He was visiting Hungary, and one of the points that he made, and one of the points that came up during those meetings, was that this was not just about trade and economic relations. It was also about cultural exchanges, about people-to-people exchanges. How essential are these people-to-people exchanges? What does China need to learn about the business and trade environment in Central Europe?
Hello from lovely but a bit cold Budapest. Thanks for having me tonight. Yes, indeed, China-Central Europe relations have at least 3 pillars: the political dialogue, the economic and trade dialogue, and the people-to-people exchanges. When it comes to the latter one, I think we have to say that there are a lot of common between our regions. First of all, there is a shared history between the two sides, and of course at the very same time we know a lot about each other, but there is still empty of a lot of space to learn more about each other, especially when it comes to Hungary and China. Not too many people know, but for example, one of the most famous Hungarian poems is well known by most of the Chinese people. And one of the major results I would like to point out when it comes to the achievements of the 16+1 cooperation in the fields of people-to-people cooperation is the tremendous increase of incoming tourists from China to Central Europe, to the Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland, for example.
Victor, how important is this region to China, especially in the context of its Belt and Road initiative?
Thank you very much for having me. I think the 16+1 framework is very important to China, especially in the overall context of the One Belt, One Road initiative. China knows many of these countries very well, some because of historical reasons, some because of very large investments by Chinese companies in these countries. Let me talk about Albania as an example. In China, in the 1960s and 70s, people like me grew up watching Albanian movie and listening to Albanian songs. And this is a legacy of relations between China and Albania, for many other countries in the 16+1 framework, China has very deep relations with them. And I think right now these countries all need more investment. They need to have larger overseas market. They need to team up with other major players to beef up their industrialization and to identify larger, more sustainable markets for their commodities, their products, and their services. And I think this makes all the sense for these 16 Central and Eastern European countries, because relying on EU is one thing, it's absolutely important, but having China as a major partner as well as a large market also makes a lot of sense. These two goals do not conflict with each other. They very much complement to each other. And from the Chinese perspective, the overall Eurasian connectivity linking from East Asia all the way to Western Europe need to go through East and Central Europe. And all these countries will become very important connectivity points going forward in this very large Eurasian continental development strategy.
Anton, what is your view when we look at this grouping, this platform, if you like? Is this the best way to improve relations, especially trade relations between the countries of Central Europe on the one hand, China on the other?
Well, absolutely. The Chinese are doing in reverse, in a sense, what the EU has been doing for the past 25 years, moving to the east. The Chinese are slowly expanding their economic influence towards the west, and they have been spectacularly successful. Grzegorz mentioned the issue of globalization and its irreversibility. That's absolutely true. But the real question surrounding what happened in Budapest is, on whose terms does globalization happen? And I think that the countries of the former third world, now known as the developing world, including China, of course, which is one of the largest economies in the world, are having a say in the rules that are being abided by. It didn't help that the United States was negotiating the TPP around China, and it didn't help that the Obama administration went on record and publicly stated that it wants the United States to determine the rules of global trade for the foreseeable future. The Chinese, without making too loud statements, seem to be moving in a different direction and actually acting to create the rules of international trade. The reaction from EU capitals to the West and from Brussels to what's been going on in Hungary is very interesting, because there is a palpable sense of discomfort that the East European countries can be breaking away, not fully, of course, no one expects that and it's not going to happen, but making choices too independently from Brussels or Berlin or Paris. And this is something to watch for. It's a very interesting dynamic.
How does Russia look at this? Because here we have a country like Russia, which has traditionally exercised its influence in this part of Europe. Now that's not the case anymore.
No, it isn't. And look, the Russians have made peace with the fact that Central Europe is long been beyond its reach for 25 years now. The issue for the Russians now is really what role will they play in the One Belt, One Road initiative, and how they can bring the Eurasian Economic Union in cooperation with it. Now, the Chinese have been very open to cooperating with the Russians and with the Eurasian Economic Union to find a modus vivendi and to basically create an inter-regional cooperative venture that basically spans the whole of Eurasia. From the Russian perspective, though, I don't think there's really much competition with the Chinese over Central Europe, because the Russians will use the Chinese overtures to Eastern Europe as a way to essentially expand their own interests into the EU, which had severed ties with Russia over the Ukrainian conflict.
Grzegorz, as we've heard, China is a rising power, a growing power, and its influence is being felt around the world. I want you to take a listen to what the Hungarian Prime Minister had to say about this. Let's watch.
The sources from Europe are not enough anymore in themselves. Therefore, we welcome the fact that, as part of this new economic world system, China looks to this region, whose development it wishes to take part in.
So we have the Hungarian Prime Minister there, Grzegorz, talking about a new economic system. What kind of realignment are we seeing in international relations right now, especially when it comes to economic and trade relations?
I think that we must be as much pragmatic as possible. So many people now repeat the great saying by late Deng Xiaoping, it doesn't matter is the cat black or white as long as he catches the mice. Definitely China does, much better than very many other countries of different system. And from the East Central European perspective, including my country of Poland, we are not turning our back against globalization, but we have learned the message from the recent financial and economic crisis, which was not made in China, it was made in USA. It wasn't made by state capitalism, it was made by neoliberal capitalism. China is more active here. Russia has been recently less active, more for political than for economic reasons, but she will come to the fore. And I think it is good for us East Central Europeans, because there is nothing better for economic external strategy as diversification. We are in need of more capital, so foreign investments are welcome. And if China, aiming for Western rich European market with the export of China, has to go through Russia, post-Soviet republics of Central Asia, Eastern Europe, including Poland, to Germany, to Benelux, to Scandinavia, to France, it is what you call in China win-win. Somebody is joking that win-win in China, as in football, means 2-0 for China. But we believe that it is going to be beneficial for everybody involved, but to what extent, it remains to be seen. And I'm not afraid of China's expansion, but again, I would advise to the governments of small and medium countries like this 16 in Eastern Europe, but also somewhere in ASEAN, in your part of the world, or in Central Asia, or in Northern Africa, to diversify. This is the good advice, and this is also what I learned when I was in charge of Polish economic policy a couple of times.
Okay, lots more to talk about, but we are going to take a quick break right now. We'll come back and talk more about China and Europe. Stay with us.